I became a lifelong Star Wars fan when I was 10 years old, after watching Revenge of the Sith in theaters. I loved the overall storyline and was curious to see what the characters were up to after Episode 6. So imagine my shock and disappointment when I learned, in Star Wars Dark Empire, published in 1991 by Dark Horse Comics, Luke turned to the dark side and became the clone Palpatine's apprentice. As someone who adored Luke Skywalker, this was sacrilegious. Granted, he only turned for a little while, then came back to the light side at the end, but to me, that didn't matter. It still totally went against how Luke was portrayed in the movies.
I'll never turn to the dark side. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
This is a man who would rather die than sacrifice his Jedi principles. As a result, I lost interest in exploring the expanded universe after Return of the Jedi, and thankfully I wasn't alone in doing so. When the expanded universe was officially recognized as non-canon by Lucasfilm after they were bought by Disney, I was relieved that Dark Empire was finally, unambiguously non-canon. At the same time, though, I feared that the newly announced sequel trilogy would also screw up Luke. Is he going to turn to the dark side again? Is he going to throw away his Jedi principles to begin a lame, centrist Grey Jedi Order? I braced myself for the worst when I went to see The Last Jedi. And I loved it! Oh sure, this was definitely a different take on Luke, but even in his bitter state, you can still see glimpses of the old Luke. And the reasons for his newfound cynicism were gradually explained and made sense, at least to me. And by the end of the movie, he's back to his old self, performing one of the most badass demonstrations of the Force we've ever seen. Despite some concerning first impressions, and admittedly weak subplot, and wasted potential, I thought that The Last Jedi proved to be a wonderful send-off to one of the greatest heroes of all time. Unfortunately, the entire internet disagreed with me, and some of the most vocal critics of The Last Jedi were fans of the expanded universe. When I initially thought about writing this video, the original title was The Hypocrisy of Expanded Universe Fans. After all, they complain about how The Last Jedi quote-unquote ruined Luke, yet they constantly sing the praises of the expanded universe, even though it has Dark Empire, where Luke did the exact opposite of what he said he would do in Return of the Jedi.
I'll never turn to the dark side.
But then I thought, am I making the same mistake I have accused expanded universe fans of making? Perhaps, just like The Last Jedi, Dark Empire's unorthodox portrayal of Luke was meant to show what makes Luke so great in the first place. Perhaps I too needed to stop clutching my pearls and give the story a chance to explain itself. After all, many critics of The Last Jedi would say Luke would never even think about doing something dark. Which is very similar to my criticism of Dark Empire, so I loaded up Marvel Unlimited and began reading the comics for myself. As it turns out, Dark Empire is less about Luke turning to the dark side, and more about Luke sabotaging the dark side from within. He willfully places himself in a situation where he risks serious psychological harm in order to help the New Republic defeat the Imperial Remnant. Although Luke initially appeared complicit with Palpatine's actions, leading Han to call him out as a traitor, he ultimately gives Leia the control codes for Palpatine's new world devastators. Dark Empire also marks the first appearance of Force projection, although in this story it's considered a dark side power. Why? Maybe because it's deceitful. But then again, bending someone else's will to your own sounds way more ethically dubious, yet Jedi do it all the time. Luke confronts Palpatine as he's transferring his consciousness to a new clone body, but he's too late. Palpatine battles and eventually overwhelms Luke. At this point, Luke finally becomes a slave to the dark side. Yet even still, he's not fully lost, as shown by his pleading with Leia to help bring him back to the light. The great Luke Skywalker, saved from the dark side by his sister. I guess Kathleen Kennedy has been pushing her anti-male, feminazi agenda into Star Wars since the early 90s. Some people have this weird, satanic image of Rian Johnson, as if he deliberately set out to ruin Luke's character just because he can. But if you actually listen to or read what he has to say, he comes off as someone who understands the importance of Luke and how he wants to do him justice. Perhaps Dark Empire made Rian Johnson believe that fans would be willing to accept a different take on Luke as long as he turns awesome again, which turned out to be a huge miscalculation. So the question is, why are some fans okay with Dark Empire but not The Last Jedi? Perhaps it's because, despite the facade of Luke turning to the dark side, he's actually actively undermining Palpatine's plans. Whereas in The Last Jedi, he pretty much gives up, and by the time he comes back around, he dies anyway. These differences illustrates the contrasting narrative intent of each story. In Dark Empire, Luke was meant to illustrate the lure of the dark side. The dark side is a drug. Like any drug, the dark side is the quick and easy path to short-term satisfaction, but it's also a path of isolation and sadness, as the dark side consumes your soul. No one is above the lure of the dark side, not even Luke. Because addiction to power can be so great, Luke needed family support from Leia to help him kick the habit. In short, Dark Empire is a refutation of the Grey Jedi idea of using the dark side for good. In The Last Jedi, Luke is faced with the ultimate challenge of overcoming catastrophic failure. Even though he stopped himself before he could actually hurt Ben, his impulse to protect his friends from death and destruction inadvertently created another Darth Vader. He made his worst nightmare come true, and this failure obviously weighs heavily on him. Couple that with finding out about how shitty the Jedi were in the prequels, and it's easy to see why Luke would be so disillusioned.
The legacy of the Jedi is failure, hypocrisy, hubris. At the height of their powers, they allowed Darth Sidious to rise, create the Empire, and wipe them out.
Just like in Dark Empire, Luke needed a close friend to help bring him back from his despair, this time in the form of Master Yoda.
Heeded my words not, did you? Pass on what you have learned. Strength, mastery, but weakness, folly, failure also. Yes, failure most of all. The greatest teacher, failure is.
When Yoda tells Luke to look past a pile of old books, he's telling him not to let the failures of the Jedi, or himself, define their legacies. To rise above the failures of the past and grow stronger from it. Which is why, at the end of the movie, Luke decides to become a symbol of hope for the galaxy and the coming resistance. Oh sure, he doesn't lift up AT-ATs and smashes them together like the fanboy in me wanted him to do. I have come to avenge my friend Han Solo. Thanks, kid. But I appreciate how Rian Johnson brought the Force back to basics.
For my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is. Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter.
The Force is not a power you have. It's not about lifting rocks. It's the energy between all things, a tension, a balance that binds the universe together.
The Jedi were supposed to be keepers of the peace, not soldiers, but Palpatine orchestrated the Clone Wars to force them to go against their own modus operandi.
The Force not make one great. A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack.
By resolving the attack on Crate in a peaceful, non-violent manner, Luke has become the embodiment of an ideal Jedi. As for those who feel disappointed because we didn't see much of classic Luke before he died, well, he's going to be in Episode 9, and this time, he's more powerful than we can possibly imagine. Although my Disney shield contract requires me to say that I still prefer how The Last Jedi handles Luke, I do have a newfound appreciation for Dark Empire. Neither of these stories were written by people who hated Luke. They just wanted to give their hero a more mature, internal struggle. which ultimately makes them greater heroes.